Welcome to MassBio's weekly town hall with President and CEO Bob Coughlin. I'm Jennifer Nason, Senior Director of Communications for MassBio, and we're thrilled to have with us today Jodie Morrison, who's the CEO of Cadent Therapeutics and a champion for diversity and inclusion in the industry. Welcome, Jodie. Welcome, Bob. Bob, I'll turn it over to you to say a few words about our guest.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you all of you for joining us here at this week's virtual town hall with MassBio. And we're so excited. I can't tell you how excited I am for our guest today because this woman is truly amazing. Jodie is the CEO of Cadent Therapeutics, but more importantly, she's a leader in our industry. I recall, it seems just like yesterday, Jodie, several years ago, we started talking about what our industry was going to do to address diversity and inclusion as it relates to board seats, as well as a comprehensive ED&I policy for our industry. And, you know, we were working closely together, and I was able to learn so much from your leadership. But something that I want to talk about today as well is how CEOs of small to mid-sized companies and all different companies have band together to really address this COVID-19 crisis that we're in. And nobody in the industry has led more than Jodie by pulling together a group of CEOs. And you folks, you're going to hear about how this all happened and what they've been doing. And I'm so excited for it. So Jodie, thank you for being such a friend. Thank you for being a mentor. And thank you for showing me the way. I truly appreciate all that you've done for us in this industry and myself in particular. So back to you, Jenny.
Great. Well, welcome, Jodie, and thank you, Bob, for those words. Before we dive in, just a bit of housekeeping. As always, we want this to be an interactive discussion, so please use the Q&A tab right at the bottom and ask questions throughout, and we'll get to as many as we can. So just to start, Bob gave you a bit of a preview, but early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, Jodie, you mobilized a group of more than 150 CEOs to collaborate, share ideas, and just try to get through this continually changing landscape. So can you tell us a bit about the impact of that group and how it's been able to coordinate efforts around COVID-19, testing pilots, sharing employee strategies, and more?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And Bob, thanks for your kind words. It's been a pleasure working with you over the years. But talking about the CEO Forum specifically, so it really started in early March. So I think as we were starting to see the impact here in the greater Boston area, as part of the Atlas portfolio at Cadent, I had the benefit of receiving a lot of policies from other companies that people were putting together really in that first week of March, as we were all starting to decide, are we staying in the office? Should we start to send people home? Many of us had been at the Cowen conference. And so we were challenged with the fact that, many of us might have been exposed in that setting, given some of the outbreaks within our industry. So we were facing that like everybody else. And so as I started to see these emails come in, I reached out to Atlas and said, could I just coordinate this for the CEOs of Atlas and put together sort of a crowdsourced portal where we share policies, procedures, documents, guidances from the agency that we're all getting, just so we have a central repository for that. And so from there, we thought it made sense to maybe pull a call together for the CEOs to organize ourselves around that concept. So that, I think, started out to be about 18 people in the beginning. By week 2 of March, I think it was closer to 40, and then it just spiraled from there. And I think the real need was, it was crisis management, right? It was by leaders, for leaders, crisis management at a time that nobody had really ever prepared for. We were fortunate to have a few people who were CEOs of various companies that had expanded through well beyond Atlas, I should say. We have a number of different venture firms, backed companies, and they're public companies. It's a real mix at this stage. But we had some people that have been in pandemic modeling teams for large pharma that had sort of been ahead of the curve on this over the years and being prepared for this. So we were able to learn from those folks. We brought in a lot of CEO appointees, so it wasn't just CEOs. It grew pretty extensively to include folks, that we had lawyers coming in, so general counsels. We had folks that were HR professionals, operations team members, CSOs, and so it expanded beyond that. CMOs who are focused on clinical trial impact, So we ended up segregating out into various subcommittees. We had a clinical trials subcommittee, obviously huge impact there, preclinical and vivarium impact team that was focused on the challenges they were facing, community giving and community impact, which has been a pretty exciting one, and that leverages really into the diversity topic, so I'll come back to that. A fundraising and financial markets impact team, and then we had a kind of work re-engagement and pandemic modeling and testing group, and that at times was 2 committees, at times was a single committee, but they've been extremely active. We've sort of sunsetted a number of the committees over the course of the last week or two as we've gotten to sort of the steady calm in the middle here. We may need to bring those back up at some point if there's a second wave. But as we're sort of in the middle here and in a bit of a steady calm, the real focus I think right now is breaking across the sort of HR topics and the work re-engagement as people are bringing back people into the office. Obviously, we launched a testing pilot through the forum that is now being expanded, which is pretty exciting. So we'll have better access to that, and we're starting to look at satellites outside of Cambridge. So maybe one in Watertown soon and beyond, maybe the Seaport. So we're thinking about those areas. And then we have the community impact group, which I think initially was focused on things like working with Life Science Cares to bring in funding for their COVID-19 response funds. We also had, we did a whole collection for the Pine Street Inn, which was pretty tremendous. We took a ton of stuff to the Pine Street Inn, so that was super exciting. But obviously, as protests have emerged in the response to George Floyd's death and other, obviously, challenges and deaths in recent weeks, we felt that it was time to pivot and really start thinking about the diversity impact and what we could do there. And that partnership with Life Science Cares is a big part of that. Obviously, their work with sort of addressing poverty and social inequity, I think, is really important. And so they've been a great partner to us on that front.
And if
Wow,
I could add,
incredible. Yeah, Bob, please do.
well, I mean, when you think about what MassBio's role was in this pandemic, it was really to be that conduit to government, to our industry. And then, this group made it so easy for us to communicate real time, quickly to so many CEOs. So when things would come up like, were we going to remain essential? Right at the beginning, to have all these CEOs saying, all right, this is what we need to be essential. It gave me the information that we needed at MassBio, so the MassBio team could go talk to government and say, okay, this is what needs to be essential. This is why. These are our work practices. When you have a group of that many CEOs who are so smart and diverse by way of background, and think of what they have the ability to do. I mean, we were leading the way. I was like the most proud business association leader in the world, because I would meet with all the other business associations and we're like, well, this is our testing strategy. This is our back to work strategy. This is what we're doing as it relates to philanthropic giving. This is how we're communicating. And when you think of the outsized role that we're playing in the fight against COVID-19, just from a research and development standpoint, it's because the leadership of this industry, nobody was competing with each other. Everybody was working together. And I think we were good. Now we're really great at communicating. And this is something that will carry through to post-COVID-19. And it will carry through, when we address, and we'll talk more about systemic racism, to have a platform where everybody can communicate openly and honestly, like painfully, just raw conversations about things that otherwise would go, people would not talk about. It's been amazing, Jodie. So thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's playing so much more of a role than people even understand. And that's why I want to talk about it to our audience today.
No, it really kind of was an organic thing. And that's what I think is so great about it, that it started with a small group of people and then through our networks just continue to expand from there. And, we're still having people join some large pharmas, large biotechs are joining in now as well. And so I think it's been organic, and that's what's been great about it, but it has not been competitive. And I think that's one of the best parts. It's really been, sort of how do we as an industry get through this? How do we help our employees get through this? How do we make sure we're communicating and addressing the challenges, fear of job loss, fear of, sickness, right? How do we address this as an industry and help, make sure our employees, our teams, and eventually the patients we're trying to treat are being considered the right way. And so it wasn't competitive at all, nor was it honestly like the plan when I started it. It just organically grew. We were all responding in real time to the same things. And so sharing how we were communicating that, sharing what policies we were putting into place. And now as we've worked towards reintegration in some of the companies in particular that have labs, what are the policies? How are you handling masks? How are you handling social distancing? Are you still doing are the executive teams coming in? Is that a good thing or a bad thing, right? It's more people coming in that don't need to be there. What about public transport? How are we handling that? And so all of those types of topics were things that we managed through the forum. But the subcommittees were a huge part of that and really drove a lot of the key topics and then reported that out on a weekly basis.
Fabulous.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it really is a testament to, the impact collaboration can have. And let's shift that conversation a little bit. You've talked about how now you're engaging those CEOs through this, really difficult time. And you've been a champion for diversity and inclusion, for years. As Bob said, you were one of the driving forces in MassBio's own commitment to D&I. And you've also been outspoken about how to use your own leadership and platform to push for change. So Jodie and Bob, let's talk a little bit about, how you're leading employees and the industry at large through this, Black Lives movement. How are you helping to enact, both change within your organization and broader change among the industry? Maybe Jodie, we could start with you, and then Bob, I'd love for you to weigh in.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's similarities and differences to what we were dealing with when we started the Gender Diversity Initiative, which is really where my involvement was critical within the MassBio starting of that, working with Listream, doing the survey of the industry to think of those topics. So there's similarities, right, around needing to work together and work towards solutions, but differences in the respect that I think in the topic of gender diversity, right, the pipeline was 50-50 at the entry point into the industry. That is not the case when you're talking about the challenges with systemic racism. The numbers are very, very small, about a third of what they should be if you think about the general population out there. And that's a problem. That's a real problem in our industry. So it's not as simple as how do we do what we did with gender diversity, which was figure out how to help people climb the ladder and get into positions of power. It's more a challenge of going back even before that, right? This may be a multi-generational impact that we need to make, going back on STEM education, going back into schools and making sure we're talking to the right populations and getting that the kind of access to the industry that people need to feel comfortable coming into this industry. We had a great discussion with the forum yesterday with Rob Perez, who is the founder of Life Science Cares, about this topic and thinking about different ways that we can think about recruitment in the industry, different ways we can go into not the typical colleges that we recruit from, go to the other colleges, right? And start to look for the best and brightest in a more diverse population and bring those into the industry. We're not doing a good job of that right now. And so I think that's a place to start. I think the biggest challenge for me, and I said this yesterday on the call, Bob, I know you were on it, is, how do we do that? Like, I'm a white female, right? Let's just call it what it is. Bob's a white male, right? I want to address this issue, but I also know when we did the gender diversity, if it was a bunch of men telling me what they thought we should do for gender diversity, I would have had an issue with that, frankly. But we had to work as a collaboration, right? We had to come together, male and female, to address that issue. And I think that's what needs to happen here, but I'm not sure we always feel like we have the language we need to do that safely, if you will. And so I think we need to partner on that and figure out the right way to drive this initiative forward. I think that's going to be critically important.
Yeah, I mean, well said, Jodie. And, when I look at what we can do as MassBio, and again, we've had a strong focus on equity, equality, diversity, and inclusion. And Edie Stringfellow, who's our director of ED&I, she could work 50 hours a day, right, to try to get this done. But what we need to do, and what we're going to do, is we're going to, we'll use our privilege and position of influence to really stand up for change and speak out against racism and discrimination and demand accountability from all the players, to see this issue isn't at a tipping point anymore. It's a breaking point, right? So yeah. What are the combination of many things that we can do? And I love talking to Rob Perez about it, and I love what Life Science Cares is doing. And that's why when we worked together with the Mass Life Sciences Center, Life Science Cares, MassBio and MassBio Ed to build out, it was David Lucchino under his chairmanship at MassBio that we wanted to build out Project On-Ramp so that we can change how we pick interns. If people don't know somebody in this industry, it's so hard to break in. And if everybody at the top is white, how are we going to diversify that pipeline like you talk about? So it's a combination of education. We need to address healthcare disparity, right? Talent as a whole. Why don't we have more partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities? So these are, like, we're working right now as an industry, and we're all going to work together on expanding our initiatives and really coming up with a multi-point plan so that we can affect change. Right? And you think about, even this translates all the way over to even clinical trials. How often do our clinical trials not look like the population that we want to provide therapies and cures for? Right? So, but you see all these different pieces. Now's the time to make sure we're addressing all of them. And it's not going to happen overnight, but we need to act now. No more talk. Right? Just like we did with D&I as it related to gender diversity. Have you seen an all-male panel recently?
No, we've definitely made some good stride with. I mean, I think we still have work to do. I'm the first to say that we still have a lot of work to do there, but I think we are making strides, and we're making an impact in small and large ways, and it takes time, and we have to be patient. But I think we've been talking too much about, the concept of D&I and what we want to do. We need to take action, and we need to capitalize on this moment where I think many of us in the industry are looking for ways to contribute. What are the things we can do today to drive for actionable change? And I think that's what we have to define as an industry. And I'm hopeful that we can pivot and use part of this forum to actually begin those conversations and really think about what can we do. We started with an open letter, Bob, as you remember, on gender, which was a follow-up to another open letter about the infamous party out at JP Morgan. And so we did it on the year anniversary, really, about what are the best practices? What are the things that as a group of leaders, we sat in a room and came up with 10 tangible things we could take action on. And we challenged companies to pick a few of them and try to implement them within their companies. And a lot of companies did. But there's still work to do. But I think we have to think about tangible things we can tell people, these are the actions you can take. Things like Life Science Cares and contributing there are good examples of that.
That's right. And another thing too, when people say, you got to have that uncomfortable conversation, it's uncomfortable for a reason, right? Let's have it and let's make it not uncomfortable anymore and have the discussion and take the actions.
Yeah, absolutely. Jodie, you said something about how you're, a white woman and how you need to use that platform to speak up. I mean, Bob, you're a white man. I think we've been hearing a lot from other other leaders in the industry that they're just unsure of how to insert themselves in this conversation. They don't know if it's their place. They don't know where to start. So I'm just wondering if both of you can, impart some advice to those, small company CEOs. How do you use that voice? How do you lead on challenging issues like racism and inequality?
Mm-hmm.
Bob, do you want to start or do you want me to?
Yeah, no, I'll grab it. Okay, with leadership comes responsibility. If you're the CEO of a company and you want to change something, and if you want to change how things are, you have to change how you do things, right? So in this case, are you hiring brown and black people? Right? How if you're not finding candidates, are you broadening your search so that you will? Right? There's so many things that you can do as a leader and lead by example. And I think, as a white man, I'm going to use my voice and platform to engage in this conversation until it isn't, so it's not uncomfortable. And let's just do it. So I think that would be my advice to other folks.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do think, when you step into these roles, you have a responsibility, and that's something that we need to take very seriously. And you have an opportunity, I think, in these roles to have a platform to use and to do good in the industry. And I think there's an opportunity for that. And I've dedicated the last probably 5 years to really gender diversity and driving forward on that. And I have not spent as much time as I should on racial diversity and focusing on that. And so it's something that I need to pivot to in my own thinking, in more broad stroke diversity. It was partly because I didn't know what tools to use. And that's, I think, the piece many of us are challenged with. We had a good very early days discussion yesterday on, what recruiting groups we could talk to that actually drive for recruitment of people in the life sciences of color. Thinking about how to get involved with groups that are for minorities who are presenting scientific presentations, right? How do we get involved in STEM education in our communities, right? To bring that to the kids when they're growing up. And how do we work within our own organizations really to drive for that change? I think a lot of us have core values, right, that reflect a desire to show and embrace difference in people, but it's got to be more than words on a page at this point. We have a moment here, and I think we have to commit and capitalize on that moving forward. And we'll be better as an industry if we do so. I mean, this is diverse voices always drive a better bottom line. We know that. We know that the diversity in the room gets you out of the box, if you will, the old perpetual box, right? It makes you think differently. And the communities that we look to serve as biotech, right? The communities we look to bring our drugs to in the future don't look like just Bob and I and you, right? They look very different, and we need to make sure that we're thinking about what makes sense there. The price of our drugs is different in different populations. We need to be thinking about the impact of that very, very differently, I think, as an industry. And I think so as we move forward, I hope that we'll be able to utilize part of what we formed around COVID to take action here as well. This is a really kind of a crisis management group in a lot of ways, I think is what it is, for leaders, by leaders, to think about tough topics and how you work through them. And I think there's a real commitment right now to spend some of our energy on this topic. And so we're going to be rolling out some changes within the forum to reflect that in the near term.
It's wonderful. And I know, MassBio has some announcements coming up as well to kind of roll out our thoughts on how we expand, just as you said, into more racial inequality. But we do have a question from the audience. Jodie, this is for you. What kind of measures have you used to enrich the pool for diverse candidates for roles in your current or past companies? So I know you mentioned kind of using recruiters that focus on, diversity. Are there any other kind of tools you can share?
So tools are tough, right? I think it's really about what people see when they look at your company. I think that plays a tremendous role. I think when people look and they see a diverse board, they see a diverse leadership team, they can see themselves in that company. And I have said for a long time, and most of the female CEOs I know say the same thing, we get more female candidates. We don't go out looking for them, they come to us. And I think it's because they can see themselves in that type of environment. And so it sort of naturally drives. And if we look back at the Livestream report, Bob, it totally makes sense, right? The data in there was saying women in senior leader roles wouldn't even apply to companies that had all male on the leadership and board. There was it was an overwhelming number of people that responded to that. And so I think there's truth to that. So I think mirroring what you want to bring in is a part of it. I'm still learning about the right recruitment tools for people of color, and that's something that I need to spend more time on. And I think we need to, as an industry, have access and understand what those options are. So we're going to need to really think through that. I think many of us have thought of diversity as just non-white, and it can't just be that simple. It really can't be that simple. It has to be much broader, and we need to start to focus on Black and brown people coming into our industry at a higher rate than they are now, which is about a third of where they should be if you looked at a total population.
Yeah, and that's another thing, Jenny, and as we've discussed here at MassBio, folks, when we're trying to encourage our member companies to go outside our traditional networks for hiring. And when we all try to steal from each other's companies to our own companies, you're not changing anything. People are just having musical chairs from company to company. So, I mean, we encourage people, look at law firms, look at accounting firms, look at people in the media industry, look in retail, look in all these other industries, and let's make it easier for people to enter into our industry. That's why the name of Project On-Ramp was so important, because we're building an on-ramp into the best industry in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Why would people not want to work in the life sciences? We want to get everybody we can in, because to your point earlier, Jodie, the more diverse any organization is, the better the outcome. And there's nothing harder than inventing a therapy or a cure for a disease. So we need to be diverse.
I think that's right. And the thing that I would also add is, and this is true for the gender diversity, and it will be true for this, we don't have enough people to staff our companies. Let's be honest, right? We're stealing from each other because we don't have enough people. And so and as we continue to grow, I mean, how many new startups in the last 24 months, right? In the last 2 years, we're going to continue at this level, and we're going to top out. We need to tap into a different pool than we're currently tapping into. And this a solution for that. And we need to look at it as not just a solution around diversity, but a solution to the future of our industry. And I think we can all get behind that. Even if we don't know the right words and the right actions to take, we need to figure out how to solve for that, because the industry is not going to be able to grow like this, in the way it looks right now. It just can't.
Right. That's right.
Absolutely. So believe it or not, we only have about 4 minutes left.
Stop it.
And we've talked a lot about the challenges that we always say this goes by in like 2 seconds, and it really does. But we've talked so much about the challenges that we're facing, how we're trying to come together to solve these challenges. And I think, I know Bob and I have talked a lot about this. I think there's a silver lining in all of this. There's a silver lining to all the challenges we're dealing with around COVID. How it's accelerating, adoption of digital health and all these other things. And then around, this movement right now, it's putting a spotlight. Companies can no longer turn an eye to D&I, right? They need to commit to it. So let's talk a little bit. Let's end this with kind of the silver linings of this. And Jodie, I'd love to start with you, and then Bob, please jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have to recognize this is a challenging time, right? We're seeing people die from COVID. We're seeing, situations like what's happened with George Floyd. This is a horrible death that didn't need to happen, right? And so it's hard to call anything a silver lining from that. But I do think that through these moments in our history, change can come. As a country, as an industry, change can come. You look at earlier pandemics and what came out of those, right? What changed? There was a great article I read at the very beginning of this in March talking about the AIDS crisis and how the LGBTQ plus community sort of grew in a lot of ways out of that pandemic. Out of that, they sort of had this awakening, if you will, in the whole world about that community, and it led to some of the things that we've seen. So I do think you can see change coming. And I hope what we're seeing, the protests we're seeing, the demand for social justice and for, equity amongst racial division that we've seen forever in our country and within our industry, I think we have to call for action on that. And I really hope we don't miss this opportunity to really see a much more positive, place on the back end of this, but it's going to take a while. I think that the impact that we've seen from COVID also has the opportunity to flip on its head how we work as a industry and how we work as businesses. Will we rely on brick and mortar as much as we used to? I hadn't used Zoom, hadn't even heard of Zoom before this happened. Full acknowledgement, right? WebEx was like this thing I would call into and never turn my video on, right? The whole world has changed in 3 months for the better in some ways. And hopefully we can capitalize on that, whether it's about how we work and how we engage with one another and how we build a more diverse and inclusive environment around us. I hope we can get there. That's my hope.
Wow, that was beautifully said. Thank you, Jodie. And in closing on my side, Jenny, I know we're up against the clock, but I am choosing to look at where we're at in the world right now as it relates to COVID-19, as well as systemic racism. This is an opportunity for us to change, one, how we invent drugs, because there's so much more collaboration happening right now. We're accelerating. We're going to invent a vaccine, which is the most important thing to the world's economy. It's going to change the image. We are changing the image of our industry, which is, thank God that's happening, because people appreciate how important, drug discovery is right now. We may be able to do this by December or January, when traditionally it would take 5 to 15 years. That's going to translate through to other research that's going to happen for all sorts of unmet medical need. Where we're at in our world right now, people are demanding change. Change is coming. So what can we all do? We can learn about systemic racism. We don't need to go to our brown and black friends and have them teach us. Like Rob Perez said yesterday on a call, one of his friends said, I'm not black, Google, look some of this stuff up, read a book and learn about I've learned more about unconscious bias in the last 5 years than I ever thought I would. And it's made me a better person. So things like that, take it upon ourselves to listen, take it upon ourselves to learn, and then act. I talked a little bit earlier how a lot of these steps are going to take time to fix the problem. We've challenged the MassBio team. Every department needs to pick one thing that they can do that will solve this problem quickly. We're going to open up our purchasing consortium to include, minority vendors. We haven't done that. Let's do it, right? Let's just do it. And things like that are really, really exciting, because we're going to make the world, our industry has always wanted to make the world a better place for sick people. Now let's just make it a better place for everybody. I love it.
Love it. What a wonderful way to end. And Jodie, thank you again for joining us and for your time and insights. We really appreciate it. I know our attendees do as well. And Bob, thank you for your energy as always. And everyone, I hope you join us next week. Naheed Madalia from Boston University's Medical Center will be joining us. And he's going to tell us more about the ins and outs of where we are in this vaccine development and everything else around COVID. So thank you, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, folks. We'll see you.
Bye.